So the worker, the more he works, the more he feels outside himself, or that he has lost himself by producing something. When, for Marx, what should be happening is when we produce things, like these glasses, when we produce things, we see ourselves in what we make. We see a reflection of ourselves that increases our understanding. But in the industrial regime, what we see, according to Marx, is our own alienation, our own distance from ourselves. Let me give you another quote. It's from Six. The worker belongs to another, is how the slide is entitled. The worker, therefore, only feels himself outside his work, and in his work feels outside himself. That's just for Marx's key. The more you work, the more you feel you're not yourself. The worker feels at home when he is not working, and when he is working, he does not feel at home. The external character of labor for the worker appears in the fact that it is not his own but someone else's, that it doesn't belong to him. And for Marx, this is a contradiction because labor should be an extension of ourselves. That's really what's behind all this. It should be, Rousseau would say, by nature, an extension of ourselves. But in fact, Marx says, it becomes somebody else's. We lose ourselves in our work. And he says that the result of this is that we are in contradiction. We are in conflict. Now, he's using this Hegelian model that I talked about earlier that says conflict and contradiction are what push history along. And so Marx sees this contradiction in the worker, and then he thinks that will actually create historical change. That will create historical change. So we're living in contradiction. He writes, as a result, the worker only feels himself freely active in his animal functions, eating, drinking, procreating, or at most in his dwelling and in dressing up. And in his human functions, he no longer feels himself to be anything but an animal. In his human functions, that is the real work, he no longer feels himself to be anything but an animal. And this is the famous sentence from this manuscript, what is animal becomes human, and what is human becomes animal. What does Marx mean by that? He means that what is truly human about us, our ability to do creative work, to set off with an idea to create a pair of glasses or to create a set of crops, and then to actually do it, that's what's human about us. We have foresight, we plan, we create. That now becomes what makes us feel like an animal, like we're controlled by others. And what is the most animal about us, that we like to eat, that we procreate, that we drink too much, he thinks, that becomes when we feel free. We feel free when we're doing the most animalistic things, Marx says. We want to go to sleep. That's when we feel free because we work so hard. When we should feel most free when we work. And Marx thinks, since this is a contradiction, this has to change. Now, we have a little clip from a Charlie Chaplin film called Modern Times, where you see great examples of this. I'll show you this assembly line scene where you see the human being as Charlie turns the wrench. The human being is becoming turned into a machine, right? Or in the scene where Charlie is put into an eating machine. He is literally dehumanized right in front of our eyes as part of the industrial process. And there are lots of other scenes we could show, but this one, it seems, vividly conveys what Marx had been talking about many decades before the film was made. So, as we get to the end of this text on alienation, Marx introduces a concept that shows that the origin or the foundation on which he's making these critical comments about us living in contradiction. This is the concept of species life. And here's what he says about it. The object of labor is, therefore, the objectification of man's species life. For human beings duplicate themselves not only as in consciousness or intellectually, but we also create ourselves actively in reality. We have to see ourselves in the world we create. when we tear our products away from ourselves, when we tear the things we make away from human beings, what we're tearing apart, Marx says, is our species life. And for Marx, in this early work, species life functions a little bit like the state of nature for Rousseau. That is, it's the basis from which he makes criticism. In other words, for Marx, what's the way it should be, according to our species, according to our nature, is that our work shows us who we are. And instead, because of the industrial circumstances we live in, our work actually tears us away from ourselves. So for Marx, that means things gotta change. Things have to change because we can't go on living in contradiction. The dialectic thesis gives rise to antithesis. It's gotta change. It's gotta move in a direction in which our labor will produce a sense of gratification and freedom for us. Not just because of the stuff we can buy to sleep more or to procreate more or to get more intoxicated. No, that's for Marx not our species life. Our species life is that we are able to see ourselves in the creative work we do. We are able to see ourselves in our labor. So notice that for Rousseau, this really real, the lens through which he sees modernity is the state of nature, the ideas of pity and self-preservation. Those are the things that he holds on to, so that allows Rousseau to criticize what we've become, vain, envious, pursuing luxury. For Marx, that really real is this idea of species life. It's the idea that we should actually see ourselves in our labor, but history actually is producing the opposite. History is producing the opposite, which is that we are increasingly alienated even as we work more and more. We become further and further away from who we should be or who we might become. That's a contradiction for Marx. We're living like animals even if we have a greater capacity to be human. Boom, that should create a synthesis. That's the revolution for Marx. He was probably your age when he wrote these theses on Feuerbach, or just a little bit older. And what he said there, I think it's the 11th thesis, if my Marxist catechism class was effective. It was the 11th thesis on Feuerbach was that philosophy has always interpreted the world. The point is to change it. So I may be wrong about the 11th because my Marxist catechism class may not have been so good. But that's close to a quotation. Philosophy has always interpreted the world. The point is to change it. So, for Marx, the chicken and egg problem, what it really was it's a political problem. How can I change this world? And he is always, even when he gets old and cynical or pessimistic about change, he is always linking his ideas to action. Unlike Hegel, right? Unlike Hegel, who thought philosophy should come in afterwards and just make sense of things after the action is over. And in our next talk, we'll focus on the Communist Manifesto, which is Marx and Engels' attempt to say how historical contradictions give rise to political change. They always have, he says. And how, in our own time, Marx writes in 1847, they will give rise to radical political change, which will make our labor and our freedom come together in a synthesis. They do that in 1847, and in 1848, revolutions do break out. But they don't break out in the way Marx wanted them to, and they certainly didn't turn out the way he predicted. We'll talk about that next time.